Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Coffee and Contracts. I am your host, Rusty Whitten, and today is a very special episode to me as I have a friend and mentor. It's been integral in my professional and personal development in Brandon Adams, former RVP with Upstream Rehab, and now the VP of Sales. Brandon, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great. So good to see you, Rusty, and looking forward to our time together today.
Yeah, man. Brandon and I go way back. I am a homebody from Northeast Mississippi and never really planned to venture too far from there. But I had a call with Brandon in March of 2007 or 18. And I said right then, I found the guy I want to work with. Like, I'll do whatever it takes to work with this cat. And that included moving from Corinth, Mississippi to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where we opened 6 or 7 clinics together and grew personally, professionally. I won't tell some of the golf stories and beachfront stories that we have, Brandon, but we had a really good time in Myrtle Beach.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll always hold close to me, just the trust in our vision, and for you to move, to South Carolina and to help be a critical part of our mission and expanding care. That was an incredible journey, and one that will always hold close to me.
Yeah, for sure, man. I grew so much personally and professionally and learned a lot from you, which is why in today's episode for our show, wanted to talk about what it looks like. I've found real estate. I've gotten it funded, as we've talked about. I've gotten it built out. I've got a plan with my financial planner. My doors are open. Patients are walking in. Now what? And you and I have experienced that together, opening some clinics together. And then towards the end of the episode, I do want to highlight and lean in more to your experience now in the sales department. But first, Brandon, let's kind of tap into that operational brain that I know is so strong with you. And let's talk about stabilization mode. The doors are open. Like, what would be the first piece of advice you have to somebody that's opening their doors for the first time for their own practice?
I think first and foremost, it's celebrating the enthusiasm of, the venture that he or she has invested themselves into that first opportunity to expand care, and whether that's in a private practice, a new office, but also, stewarding like fair expectations of themselves in terms of like, what does that look like, particularly, in that first day. I think, the key pieces, particularly in that first 30 days is really establishing a framework, first of all, just organizationally, like what's that personal mission statement? How are you going to translate that mission statement into the care that you're providing that first patient that comes into the door? Or perhaps, if that's a colleague, if that's your first employee that comes in that may help at the front desk from a practice management standpoint, how are you going to engage he or she into that same mission statement? So I think just, first and foremost, it's balancing enthusiasm with the fair expectations of what, the first 30 days will look like, but committing every decision that you have into alignment with that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. You and I spoke so much about internal versus external customers, and you have to treat both of them well and have a game plan for each one of them, right? You have to understand your internal customers being those colleagues, your front desk, maybe your nurse or your rehab tech or your account manager or whoever works within your network that you're also providing customer service to, a focused mission, direction for the practice, how you're going to set your order of operations or your standards of excellence so that you can provide good care to them as an internal customer. And then obviously the external customer is the patient walking in the door, right? Or maybe that referral source that sent you that referral, or somebody you're referring out to, right? Like those people that are outside of your organization. And you have to have a plan for both in order to provide quality care, or it kind of falls flat if you're not serving both parties, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. From a external customer service standpoint, it is that engagement, it is that warranting of trust that ultimately translates into that first referral. And maybe you're opening your practice already with like a word of mouth, just awareness within the community that you're getting ready to open care. Perhaps, that was a person in the community that knows you and is trusting you to be that first patient, but you'll be balancing that also too, just with communication to the medical community that they can refer to you as a resource, to provide that care. So, ultimately just translating that into the first referral is really where that process and that journey starts to help in developing a caseload.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about kind of some operational standards for that first month, right? Like, and making sure you've got your workflow down, your customer service down. What are some other needle movers that you've seen work early on for practices that are just getting started or trying to get ramped up? Maybe it's in a new community or a new part of the community. What are some other needle movers that you've seen for those practices?
Yeah, I think it's, growing in your awareness of what, that community's needs are, so that, that does have a sales implication in terms of if you're communicating with the medical community, referring providers, if you are communicating with community partners, identifying like what those opportunities are and how does that translate best to your skill set and your
Mm,
proficiency of what you can deliver on that high quality of care.
mhm,
Those first weeks, clearly you're going to have more time, that you can engage, and there's never a better replacement than just providing great care to your patient. That's going to warrant growth in that trust
mhm.
and in that referral. So take advantage of that. We know and believe that comprehensive care is going to be the best connector to a great outcome. So, patient education, a comprehensive exercise identifying a modality that works. So really just prioritizing your comprehensiveness of care to help with the engagement with your patients.
Yeah, absolutely. That is huge. That's a really good, way to kind of get established with credibility in the community, right? That whole patient approach, that comprehensive care. We looked at it a lot just from a whole patient point of view, right? Like making sure that they're getting treatment for whatever's going on, but also being aware of other factors in their life that maybe you can refer out to or suggest connections within the community. We talked about it in the green room before the show, but it's just about being a problem solver. That's what I do in real estate. That's what we're doing as healthcare providers. As healthcare providers, it's fairly obvious what the problem is. They have a toothache or back pain, or they need surgery, or they have the sniffles, or whatever's going on. They're coming into your office for a reason. But what else is going on with this patient that maybe needs to be met that day that you're unaware of? Using that emotional intelligence to check in with the patient, to give them the full comprehensive care, as you said, kind of encompassing all of their needs in that visit. We had success, Brandon, thinking outside of the box as well. And we'll get to marketing and sales team role here in a little bit. But like finding unique niches within the community that you can serve, I think is beneficial early on. I think we can attest that being in the same parking lot as Fleet Feet was just a huge win for our early clinic in the Grand Dunes area there in Myrtle Beach. And being able to fill a need for their injured athletes and runners that have those aches and pains was huge that nobody else is really addressing. And so I think finding those unique niches in those early days can help stabilize when maybe the referrals aren't coming in or you're not, like merging with other partners. Thinking outside the box in those early days, when you talk about it, you have enough time to kind of engage your patients, but engage your community could be vital for the early success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be that, the question and the problem that you're looking to provide a solution to a referring provider, could be a specific service line, so, just equipping yourself in clinical training, continuing education that goes with the awareness of what are the needs and the opportunities. In the outpatient space, we continue to see that diversify, whether it's advanced training in dry needling, vestibular services, um, uh, providing great care to injured workers, and whether that's through FCEs, impairment ratings, or work conditioning programs. As much as you can diversify yourself, we're also seeing huge pathways in collaboration with occupational therapy and hand therapists. Pelvic health, is a growing aspect of demand in the outpatient space. So looking at just ways that you can equip yourself in giving great care and diverse care is a great way to warrant that trust. But you also have an opportunity ahead of you just as an early practitioner in a new clinic. You have access,
Yeah.
so so commonly when you're communicating with referring providers, what is the problem that you see with physical therapy? Why are you not utilizing physical therapy more? And oftentimes you hear we can't get patients in, so you can provide an immediate solution, to that problem, with the access that you're providing them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes across all verticals, right? Physical therapy is one that was an obvious need for us. We were able to solve a need for a large orthopedic provider there in Myrtle Beach by putting clinics where they didn't have clinics, and they were able to refer patients who didn't want to drive all the way to their office to where we were right there. It may be the same for dentists that can get patients in instead of some of their colleagues across town, or an orthodontist or a periodontist or an optometrist that may be kind of finding that little gap, almost like in football, right? You always find the gap in the zone coverage. There may be a gap in zone coverage in your community. Maybe that's where you've landed, and now you need to get access and word of access out to your community. And in those early days, it's always worth the effort to let access be known so that you can get people in. Well, as you're getting people in, you're obviously going to have to make some changes. You're going to need some staffing, which we'll talk about in a second. But Brandon, I think one of your strengths was helping us establish just a winning culture, a good culture of just excellence, togetherness, like kind of pulling on the rope in the same direction. Talk a little bit about that. Early on in the first 30 days is your time to kind of lay the foundation. What does that look like for a new clinic opening? What are some tips and pointers you have for building culture?
Yeah, I think, it starts, internally, just with the decision that he or she makes each and every day when you step into the clinic, and I think that's where,
Mhm.
going back to that reminder of your personal mission statement. Why did you become a physical therapist? Why did you become, a provider that aspired to be the provider of choice in that community? I think it starts there. As you grow your clinic, and whether that is your second licensed clinician, or if that is a care coordinator or a front desk associate, whomever that team and whatever that makeup looks like, it's assuring that there's also space and opportunity to communicate in a very personal and clear way. And that could look, unique to the environment or the number of people that you have, but whatever that means of communication is, I have, learned and found that there's no better replacement than just consistent communication, a weekly huddle, so even, as a practitioner, if you've grown your caseload, and looking at, okay, what is the value of the time that I can spend, whether it's just 30 minutes with a huddle with my
Mhm.
team. It's a great way to make sure that you're committing yourself to access, like, who are the patients that are trying to get in, that we're having an access related challenge, whether it's related to authorization, whether it's a schedule management aspect. But we need to be able to be a resource to get the patient in. And then also looking at it from a care engagement standpoint, once we're actively serving a patient, how do we minimize that drop off that can occur
Mhm.
if the patient isn't seeing an impact or value, so that they're, um, could be prevented barriers to completing their plan of care? That's very important to get the successful outcome,
Mm.
and the outcome in itself is very important. Like, are our patients getting better? So essentially, we all can manage and measure progress uniquely, whether that's through like our objective measures, any patient reported outcomes, whether that is just looking at milestones on short and long term goals in the
Mhm.
plan of care. But it's important that everyone understands, like, where are our patients in that continuum of that plan of care, and if we all have that clarity of what we can do to influence that as a clinician, or as a care coordinator, or front desk associate, like, we have good impact on culture that aligns with that mission statement or those values, in regards to giving great care.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so vital, is to align your North Star with your clinic's North Star. And I can't like stress the huddles enough. Like those were vital for us in growing, especially when we were getting busy. It's so easy to kind of put the huddles on the back burner because you need to get patients in, because you're starting to get busy and you're trying to prove that you can justify that second license. I've done that numerous times, like putting things aside to justify that, but you don't really realize how quickly the months can pile up, or the weeks can pile up, sometimes longer quarters can pile up without that huddle. And then you've got a disgruntled staff member, or you've got some of your operations that aren't running smoothly, and you don't have a clue of how that's what happened or where it got off. Those huddles are vital for keeping a pulse, on the clinic, on the not only just the care engagement, the patient engagement, the overall just vibe, attitude of the clinic, if you will. And it can lead to some pockets that are just like dissension, right? Where people just don't feel respected or don't feel appreciated. And it just creates a little crack in this culture that you're trying to build. And if you're not checking in consistently, those can get missed and become, pretty gaping holes in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, the key things are those huddles can assure that like your systems and your processes, like how you're prioritizing access to care, from a schedule management standpoint, as a caseload matures, have we been intentional of earmarking where, access can be, consistently committed, and if we're just
Mhm.
prioritizing that, within the schedule template itself, that's a key component, in assuring that access. But guiding your front desk, guiding your front office, your clinicians into, what does that care experience look like, from the warm welcome as soon as someone, comes into the door, to the overall care experience. And then like, what's the expectations, upon completion? Have I scheduled my plan of care appropriately to, to that goal toward discharge?
Mhm.
Do I have clarity in regards to the commitments that as a patient I have on financial cost share? So if there's any barriers to that, have we organized a game plan that is, an appropriate balance, whether it's a payment plan or whatever that looks like from an overall intake front desk workflow? Is there clear expectations of what I as a patient, will be experiencing when I come to your clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. And that factors into culture just as much as, having a fun Friday where you wear fun shirts or play good music or whatever the case is. Like you have to have a balance of both, right? Your operations where you're collecting and doing business along with building that winning culture where, we've done football Fridays where you wear your favorite football team jersey on Fridays and doing those fun things. But it doesn't matter if you're not blocking and tackling well and doing the little business items well, setting expectations for payment, for attendance and a physical therapy plan of care, making sure you're setting up reminders so that the patients can know when their appointments are to show up to come see you. You've got to set those expectations from day one and stay consistent with them. And it helps when you have a good staff. Unfortunately, you and I we were able to work with some really good clinicians and support staff over the years there in Myrtle Beach. Let's talk about staffing for a minute. It's easy when you start getting busy to start hiring for speed versus fit, meaning like I just got to get a body in here because I'm drowning with patients. I've got too much paperwork. I don't know where to turn. And so you can make a quick hire, but it may not be the best long-term fit. So what are some like key indicators or like things to keep in mind when you're looking to make those first couple of hires as you're growing? Be it like it doesn't necessarily like volume standpoint, but just what are some key triggers for you to start pulling those triggers to make hires?
Sure. Yeah. I think, for any private practitioner, it's important as you mature your caseload that, you can develop what is a functional framework for you that is essentially helping build and influence clinical efficiency, but also continues to deliver, on your quality on your outcomes. And, each private practitioner is going to have perhaps a spectrum of what that means or what that looks like for them, just in terms of their targets on, what he or she could carry on an individual basis with their caseload. But despite different levels of skill and efficiency, there are still some truths that are consistent, across the board. And how does your efficiency balance with access to care for the other patients outside of your clinic that still need you? Are you still able to align so that your clinical efficiency isn't compromising that access? And that can be measured, through your booking lag and your scheduling lag. If you are then telling the medical community or the community itself that, yes, we can see you, but it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
you're just adding to the problem. You're not the solution on what so many people that are trusting you are looking for, and that's that early access to care. So you have to make those decisions based upon, what your clinical efficiency can best manage from an evals per week, perspective. So I think that's also key. We also know what's true, and the research supports this, is that the best outcomes comes through intense care. So intense care can be measured in terms of our duration of time, so how much time are we actually spending with our patients? It's also measured in terms of our dosage, whether it's patient frequency, duration of care. So anytime that you're also seeing growth in your clinical efficiency, but then your care engagement and your duration of care decreases, that's a signal that there's a solution that needs to be navigated with your current problem. And
to
that,
not to
that
interrupt, but like to add to that, like it's also a fine line to where you got to look and make sure, is it from actual clinic growth or is it from perceived clinic growth, to where it's like I'm a scared, like I've done more evals or seen new patients, or we've had an uptick in booking this week. I need to back off, and before you know it, in a week or two, you've kind of your numbers have bottomed down a little bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think that's where just like game planning on your schedule management, how is your schedule set up to best balance access with care intensity, is really the key aspect that you have to navigate well as a clinician, but also as an operator in opening your practice, because it's the balance of those two that's going to help in making those decisions of, hey, is it time to add to my license count or grow my FTE, so that we can continue providing healthy access and care intensity.
For sure. It's a fine line, and so many people are quick to pull that trigger, and maybe the volume isn't quite there yet, or maybe it is an example of your younger or other clinicians getting a little bit nervous, and then they start discharging people, and then you're kind of in a pickle there where then you're overstaffed. You're going from understaffed to overstaffed. It's definitely a fine line that takes some thinking and some navigation, right? You can't just rush in and make a hire. Unfortunately, you're going to have to be busy for a couple of weeks and a little bit of time to kind of justify that. But timing is everything with staffing. Too late and you create burnout and people get upset. Too soon, and then all of a sudden you're understaffed when the volume doesn't increase. Could be seasonal. There's a lot of factors that go into that. What are some I guess, like, what are some ways, like examples you've seen where it was done well, and maybe an example where it was done not so well? You don't have to name names, but any specific things that come to mind?
Yeah, I think, also too, your provider selection and looking at even some diverse, workforce staffing options can also be some easier solutions to soften the operational impact on margin and caseload growth. So it's also too, if there are trusted and great clinicians that in your networking you can develop that, as that second FTE, even if he or she could, provide an option from a part-time or, per hour perspective, that's a great way to soften some of the commitments and the impact to give you a little bit more balance, but also helping assure that you've got the consistency of evals coming into your clinic, that would warrant and help justify, a full-time clinical hire. So those are some some specific examples that can help when it's really done well. I think, some of the key things, just that can be challenging is also to knowing that you want to make the best investment of a healthy onboarding experience for particularly that second clinician, the third clinician, and so on. So just giving yourself some understanding of expectations, what you may have had as an expectation of yourself in those first 90 days. If you have a newer or lesser experienced clinician that's coming in as that second hire, just knowing that you're going to still need to carry that level of efficiency yourself. Like you can't necessarily take the foot off the gas in regards to your own efficiency, because you want to make sure that you've created a remarkable experience for your new clinician, giving them an opportunity to appropriately onboard, participate in any coaching or mentorship opportunities with your huddles, with your one-on-one, with your workshops. If you're providing benefits of continuing education, for that clinician, giving them an opportunity to help and grow and build with their caseload. And I think it's a fair statement that could be a full 90 days, before he or she is where they need to be to really help, best balance the efficiency, but also giving you then the added benefit of access to care, healthy intensity, but also improve margin, because now it's not just you. You've got a teammate, that you're able to help in influencing your care.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning with internal and external customer service. You have to be solid with that internal customer service, particularly early on, no matter what the medical vertical is. If it's a veterinarian, if it's a dentist, if it's a PT, if they are not onboarded appropriately and there are those training gaps at the beginning, it can lead to some discontentment, some misunderstanding, misalignment of values and goals that can cause some issues down the road. And that's why we always were so big on those first initial touch points, the trainings early on. We spent a lot of dollars, time, and sweat equity investing in our new hires, taking them off site, taking them to lunch, getting to know them and connecting with them to where it was a really good experience. The expectations were clear and there was no misunderstanding, so that as we started to grow, and this will kind of transition to our next topic, like as we started to grow, then we could kind of stabilize the clinic, stabilize cash flow to where now you're actually a profitable business and you got some things that are working. So what are some things, Brandon, you've seen that kind of help like continue that momentum, right? You've done a really good job in your first 30 to 90 days of getting up and running. What are some like key indicators or key values for you to continue that momentum rolling as you're getting out of that like brand new clinic phase?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, the key things, if we were to kind of organize like cash flow stabilization, under a focus of just net rate, are you being paid appropriately, for the services that you are providing? It also aligns directly with just your operational processes to assure that you're doing all the little things well, so that starts, specifically like with any payers that necessitate authorization, for care to be provided. Are you doing the fundamentals well of assuring that you are obtaining authorization so that you can see the patient, and then most importantly, like be appropriately compensated, for the care that you provide? I think, we discussed earlier about, establishing expectations and clarity for your patients, particularly those that may have a contractual cost share, whether that's in the form of a copay or a co-insurance. Has that been verified on the front end? Are they aware of, what is expected of them, in participating with the plan of care? And then most importantly, like, are we executing on the collection at the time of service? So all those things are going to have an influence on cash flow. But, I think, going back to the most priority focus on care, I think, if we are consistent in providing comprehensive care, and great care that yields the best outcome, then when you look at just the content of that, that's where just the fundamentals and the blocking and tackling of clinical coding and coding appropriately, for services that you provide. Code for services that you do perform. Do not code for services that you do not perform. Those are some of the key things of just also looking at what does the evidence say best care looks like. Is it functional activities? Is it, that progression of care? Is it a hands-on approach? And we've got codes as physical therapists that help reflect that, whether that's manual therapy, neuromuscular reeducation, therapeutic activities, therapeutic exercise. Like, those codes are great ways that are essentially just communicating to a payer that, hey, what we do has skill and it has value. And ultimately that patient got better, so, allowing your coding to also be reflective in terms of what the payer is measuring your worth to look like. And it's a great, aspect to assure that you're stabilizing your cash flow.
Yeah, I used to tell all of our providers all the time, listen, Uncle Sam valued your degree very highly. You need to do the same with what you're doing, right? Like, what you do matters. It's important. And it's different than, and this is no offense to anybody, than a personal trainer or an exercise coach. What you're doing is skilled intervention, and you need to justify it as much through your coding. I can't tell you how many conversations we had around copays and co-insurance, and like, it just boggled my mind that we couldn't collect a copay that they were contractually obligated to pay. It's just like I never could conceptualize how that was an issue for some clinics. But one of the things you also have to look at is the appropriate time to pull triggers on orders and adding equipment, and whether it be capital equipment or small additions here and there, because in the early days you can nickel and dime yourself to death. by adding all these cool new gadgets. When in the reality, you've got insurance delays, you've got collection delays that may happen because of coding or insurance payment requirements, and they may not pay, for a few months down the road. There's a balancing act of adding staff, adding equipment, while maintaining good, sound business practices, right? Like you have to continue to do the little things well, coding for what we're doing, seeing enough patients before you get in the catalog and start ordering all the fun things. As fun as those things are, you have to stabilize cash flow first through your billing practices, through a steady collection process, right? Everybody across all verticals has a little bit different collection process, but we all need to collect money if we're going to stay open. And if you're then turning around and adding a bunch of equipment in those early days, like you're going to be eating into those profits and your long-term sustainability. So my recommendation early on, something I thought we did well and Upstream has done well as a company, is you've got a basic, box that you start with. And then once you're seeing some of those returns and you're heading towards cash positivity, then we can start talking about having some of those additions down the road. But you got to start with some of the low-hanging fruit, the things to kind of get you going before we start adding all the fancy bells and whistles. Would be another way to stabilize cash flow as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as a practitioner, it's just important to always ask yourself questions and be critical, in your thought process is, if I'm looking at a return on investment for any capital purchase, like what is the effect that I have to be accountable to influencing it on, whether it's growing in volume, because I have this asset that I didn't have before, or can I now provide more diverse treatment so I can measure it through my coding and the comprehensiveness of the visits that we were already seeing? But there has to be an incremental gain for that purchase to warrant and make sense. And maybe it's going to help in your referral pathways that if you have, a capital item that, that will help you in growing access, but you have to make sure that you're looking at each of those scenarios critically, to find the best solutions on your decisions there.
That's exactly right. So I appreciate you spent 30 minutes talking about your old role in operations and be more on the clinic side. Let's get in your bag now. Talk about the new role. Something you were always really good at is relation building with both physicians and referral sources and people in the community. What does a sales team look like in this? As we're getting a clinic open, you need some marketing, you need some sales role, like some sales help, be it yourself, a sales team member. What, I guess, kind of starting off, like, what are some expectations you should set early for your sales staff in supporting a new clinic that's just opening up?
Yeah. Well, I think, first and foremost, it's like as a private practitioner, if you're a team of one or however your organization is set up, is that you have the time and you have the capacity to be an active resource in that sales process. And I think, just, as a clinician, just having that confidence that the words we say and how we say them and the care that we provide and the quality that we provide in that is what the community is growing in their awareness about who you are and the services that you do provide. So being just an active participant in that is very important, because physical therapy can come in a variety of different settings, and whether that's in large organizations or smaller organizations. But we as a patient, are making choices, on what's that experience mean to us and what we're looking for. So in a lot of ways, you're selling yourself, because you're selling that trust that, if you come to my clinic, I'm gonna give you a remarkable experience, and you're going to get a great outcome, and we're going to commit to early access with intense care, and being able to deliver that time and time again, is key. But I would just encourage any, new practitioner that is, expanding care, and whether that's a new clinic or, a new operation for you, get out into the community and just communicate, go into physician offices. And if you have access to be able to communicate with a referring provider, that's great. But it's equally important to have healthy engagement with the intake associates or the referral coordinators, the medical assistants. Our medical community, functions very closely, together in unison. And it's important if you are looking at how are decisions made in terms of the physical therapist of choice, you need to know that clinic specifically in terms of how referrals are managed. And you can be
Hmm.
intentional in your time, in your engagement of asking that person, hey, what is what is your experience in utilizing physical therapy? What are some of the things you look for in what you choose in a PT option? What are the problems that you're navigating right now in that space? So that you can, ask those open-ended questions, that you can find what those pain points and problems are, and you can be the solution that they need to help in connecting those dots. That is the biggest trust factor that's going to help and warrant those referrals. Um, there's a variety of other ways that you can help influence, and this comes through education, advocacy. So it could be an educational workshop with a community group. You could do a balance workshop, or a movement screen. To a community partner. Providing some form of a service is a great way to help people even be aware of what a physical therapist does and help them with whatever that limitation is. So, offering your time is a really like impactful way to earn and warrant that trust from a sales perspective. I think, oftentimes we think of sales in marketing, and yes, there is some overlap in that, but it's not all just in collateral, in information, giveaways with your name or your brand on it. That has its time and its place, but it's essentially, um, it's really going to be your impact in terms of providing a service, providing a message and a solution that's going to warrant the referral more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Those two things go hand in hand, but like you don't always have to have all of the cool swag, the post-it notes and the pins and stuff to get your name out there. You said it earlier. It's identifying problems and being a problem solver. If you can go to that referral source and understand, hey, I'm having a hard time getting my patients in this area or for this condition, and create like a bridge to overcome that, that's going to win so many people over. We won so many referral sources over in Myrtle Beach because we provided access or provided a path or removed some barriers and some resistance to allow people to come in. And you can go and give all the great quality care that you want, but if you're not removing barriers for getting patients in to see you, then it doesn't matter. And so if you can go be a barrier remover and a problem solver for those local referral sources, you're going to win time and time again as you grow because you've been identified as a problem solver and somebody that can help. There's also other ways, like outside the box, right? For a physical therapist, it's calling on doctors, it's knocking on doors, it's getting to know those referral coordinators. For an orthodontist, and maybe getting to know your dental community and the people in the area that can refer those cases to you. What are some actual outreach efforts that you've seen? You and I've done several together, but what are some things you've seen that have worked early in the process to get your name out there, maybe to some of those non-traditional referral sources?
Yeah, I'll partner that in also to just what are some ways that looking at the experience through the patient's lens on how they're making decisions as well. The visibility and how they're becoming aware is ever evolving. So also too, just in terms of where you as a practitioner, where does your clinic line up? If I were to Google Rusty Whitten physical therapist, like how am I going to find you? So
Mhm.
also too, just from a fundamental standpoint, some of that internal customer service, call it internal marketing, having patients complete testimonials, having them complete a Google review, those are some great ways to help just boost that visibility and that
Mhm.
awareness, in regards to the community, having more of a space of knowing who you are. I think also
Mhm.
too on the digital platforms, whether it's on your organization's media handles, on your own media handles, people are looking for awareness of what does your culture look like at your clinic. Is it going to be a fun experience? Is it going to
Mhm.
be engaging? What does it look like? So looking at just some diverse ways that you can kind of share what an experience looks like when they come to
Mm.
see Rusty Whitten, like that's important, to what a patient is looking at in making decisions, and I think we're learning more and more. I'm a Zennial, so I was born in 1979. So I'll let y'all do the math here in terms of my age here. But you can also measure it through the frost that's starting to pop up here on the beard.
It's very distinguishing. I'll say that.
Yeah,
It gives you a look of like wisdom and maturity
yeah,
for
I
sure.
appreciate that. It's actually, yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely evolving by the day. Um, but we're learning how to communicate, in unique ways as well. So I'm coming on that tail end of Generation X, on the front
Mm.
end of the millennials, and now I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old, one that is Gen Z, and now learning more about my youngest, my daughter who's 14, is now on the front end of Gen Alpha.
It's wild.
So how we hear and how we make decisions is going to continue ever evolving, both from a professional standpoint, but also too just as a customer.
Mm.
So am I sharing about my culture just through reels and videos and experiences?
Mm.
Kudos to you, Rusty, and just in regards to your engagement in your space here through podcasts. It's an impactful way that you can communicate to a large group of people, and just sharing an authentic message, such as this. So I think just learning more about how we're communicating in these spaces is going to be an ever evolving way to share. Going back to your question on outreach, so I think that is going to look unique to the individual based upon their craft or what they're looking at in cultivating in their patient population. But educational workshops, is a great way to engage the community directly, offering your time, offering a support, whether it's through screening, education, access to care, come and see our clinic. Those are just ways that you can, help the community know more about who you are and how you can help them. I think, just identifying ways to, from a non-traditional standpoint, this gets into more strategic relationships, is like, how can your services or how can your network and your engagement in the community add value to your referring providers?
Mm.
Referrals is not just this one directional relationship, like a true, collaboration, and, what we refer to as the therapeutic alliance, not just from, clinician to patient, but from clinician to clinician,
Mm.
is how can we engage best care for one another and add value, to each other's services. So I think just, making sure we're asking those questions and identifying where you can build your network is a great way to also, help influence referral.
Yeah, I can't emphasize the social media aspect of it enough. Even I overlooked that in my question to you. Like, it's one thing that is not thought of as often, but I think you see the clinics who are doing a really good job at sharing information and sharing their message, do it through social media. And so many people are going to, I believe, if you're on social media, we all are probably in our community pages and community groups on Facebook. And how many times have you seen somebody say, "Hey, who's a good physical therapist or a good
Right.
chiropractor, or what dentist do you go see?" And if you're not actively involved in some of those groups and communities, people may miss you entirely. But if you're putting out educational pieces, it's a great platform like this to share impactful information that can help people. It's also a fun place to be silly. I saw on LinkedIn the other day, Upstream had a clinic seeing who could jump the highest, and with post-it notes.
Right.
We've done challenges in the past where we did pistol squats or different things that are just fun to show patients the culture that we highlighted earlier is a fun, vibrant, energetic culture. And reels are a great place to do that. And you never know what eyes are going to see that, what's going to catch and go. Being viral and going viral is so finicky that you really never know what it's going to be, who's going to see it, and could turn into not only a new patient, but a whole new referral stream or source of patients that help grow your business towards profitability. I think that's a great, great piece of advice, Brandon, for sure. I appreciate that.
Everything.
So as we start to land this plane and talk about kind of big picture ideas, I want you to have your operational and your sales hat on. I want to ask you for two pieces of advice. Number one, what would you say to the clinician who's overwhelmed in the early phases, kind of getting bogged down maybe in some of the whirlwind and not really like leaning into some of the, like, just how to help get them out of that whirlwind that we talk about a lot? And then number two, maybe a call to action or a motivational piece for somebody who's in it for a little while to kind of help keep them on that momentum path.
Yeah, I think, the best pathways to assure that you're maintaining that balance, minimizing some of the mental and emotional components that impacts the journey of a clinician is, first of all, just identifying what your personal cup fillers are. And for everyone, that may be something different. That might be reading, that might be exercise, that might be time spent with family or time spent with friends, community, whatever that is for you. I think just prioritizing that into your daily schedule, your weekly schedule is very critical to long-term success. So just not compromising, what you need to have the fulfillment and the balance and the engagement that you need to give the best experience possible for your patients. Um, I think also too, just to minimize the overwhelmment though, is making sure that your consistent processes, your daily processes, your weekly processes, monthly, quarterly, annually, like your role as a clinician, but also as an operator, there's going to be habits and best practices, processes that if you're consistent in those things, you're going to find that you're prioritizing um, both urgent and non-urgent tasks, and you're not allowing the non-urgent tasks to become urgent. So that in essence, adds to the anxiety and the overwhelmment of your roles and your functions. So it all goes back to preparation. It all goes back to having a plan, and that's where your personal scheduling, your teamwork, so the huddles, the engagement that you have with your teams are so critical to best maintain those balances. But I think at the end of the day, too, experiencing success both clinically and operationally is one of the key factors to minimizing overwhelmment. I find most overwhelmment or dissatisfaction comes from um, a location or a clinician that is not winning from an overall efficiency standpoint in outcomes. So we all have that sense of identity that if I'm coming in and I'm providing value, for my team, I'm providing access to care, and most importantly, they're getting better. Like everything that gets associated with engagement and burnout, like all those things just seem to really minimize, in that case. So I think, just kind of going back to, mission statement, schedule management, outcomes, I think is the biggest ways and the biggest takeaways to minimize the overwhelmment that can come in the profession.
Yeah, appreciate that, man, for sure. Appreciate that. Any last quick advice for people that are kind of getting that momentum and rolling? What to kind of keep that momentum, keep that fire lit? I guess we can link that back to the mission statement again, correct?
Yeah, and I would just say thank you, to our profession. We are seeing that the demand continues to grow.
Mm.
The license count is not keeping up with the demand and the needs. So for any and all of you out there that are listening and watching, thank you. We've got a tremendous pathway that we can serve and we can provide, support to our community by being accessible. Um, I can attest. I've got immediate family members that are currently patients, and I also hear testimonials from friends and from people in the neighborhoods um, that my physical therapy appointment can be one of the highlights of my day or the highlights of
Mm.
my week. So I would just say, just general encouragement. We need all of us, to be successful in our advocacy. And what that will do is it will earn and continue to grow trust, so
Mm.
that we can serve more patients, that we can grow more people to the profession, and ultimately grow our headcount as licensed clinicians, and that also too, like all those that are measuring what our value to be, whether it's through referrals or through reimbursement, um, all of the things that we're showing value and worth, so that essentially that adds more benefits to why choosing the profession. So lastly, just saying
Mm.
thank you to all those out there that are right there, committed each and every day to creating a remarkable experience for patients.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate the time today, Brandon. Appreciate you investing time in this project of mine. And sharing some education and some really good wisdom for clinicians out there that are starting their own practice or getting ready to open one, or maybe already have, and they're kind of in that overwhelmed phase. So, man, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, always a pleasure. It's great to see you today, Rusty.
Yeah, man, likewise. And so those of you out there listening, I appreciate y'all sticking around with us. Hopefully you found this impactful and insightful. I'm always open to a conversation over a cup of coffee. If you have questions about what it looks like to start a practice, where to start, if you need some advice on how to like geofence and look for places to put a clinic, I can be a resource for that. Would love to buy you a cup of coffee. Let's have a conversation. Until next time on Coffee and Contracts, for Brandon Adams, I am Rusty Whitten. Y'all go be a friend to somebody who needs a friend, and we'll catch y'all soon.